Of course.
Welcome to the Exploring Climate Solutions webinar series. The series is brought to you by the Governor's Council on Climate Change. On April 22nd, 2015, Governor Malloy issued an executive order creating the Governor's Council on Climate Change, also known as the GC3. The Council is charged with examining the efficacy of existing policies and regulations designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and identify new strategies to meet the state's greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. The Council is composed of 15 members from state agencies, quasi-state agencies, businesses, and nonprofits. To learn more about the GC3, please go to www.ct.gov/DEEP/GC3. The webinar series explores innovative and successful climate change solutions in Connecticut and the nation. The series provides firsthand accounts of high-profile municipal climate programs, climate initiatives in the corporate world, new greenhouse gas reporting frameworks, statewide sustainability programs, low-carbon fuel initiatives, and other programs and projects that help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve climate resilience. Today, we're excited to have Nick Nigro, founder of Atlas Public Policy. Nick is a national expert on alternative fuel vehicle financing, policy, and technology. He has led the development of complex financial and policy analysis tools, managed a comprehensive analysis of greenhouse gas mitigation from U.S. transportation, and is a frequent public speaker on advanced vehicle technology and other transportation-related energy and environmental issues. Today, Nick will present on the details and findings of the Market Potential Assessment for Alternative Fuel Vehicles in Connecticut, a report commissioned by the Connecticut Green Bank with support from Connecticut DEEP. It examines the market potential of various types of alternative fuels in Connecticut across different vehicle segments using 4 criteria: near-term market feasibility, environmental cost-effectiveness, and local economic benefits. The presentation will be about 40 minutes long, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. If you have questions, please submit your questions to the question box, and we'll read it aloud for Nick to respond to. Before we get started, for those of you listening via your computer speakers, if you're experiencing poor sound quality, I do encourage you to call in using your telephone. So Nick, thank you for your willingness to present today. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to get started.
Thanks a lot, Terry. Can you hear me okay?
Sounds great.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks everyone for joining. As Terry said, my name is Nick Nigro. I work at Atlas Public Policy, and today I'm going to be presenting findings from a study we completed for the Connecticut Green Bank on various alternative fuel vehicles and fuels for the state of Connecticut. Atlas Public Policy is a startup based in Washington, D.C. We started last year. We work with federal agencies, state agencies, local government, the private sector, and the advocacy community on strategies and programs to advance clean energy. We do a lot with data, so you're going to see a lot of visualizations and charts in my presentation and in the report online. And we use that data to help inform our decision-making and also to try to make that data more publicly accessible to stakeholders. So as Terry mentioned, we completed this study for the Connecticut Green Bank. It's part of a multi-phase project that we're doing with the bank on standing up a transportation program there. You can download the report for free. The website is linked at the top of this slide here. It's at the Green Bank's website. In terms of what we'll be talking about today, I want to give a complete overview of the study as well as where we're going to be going next with phase 2 of the project. We started working with the bank through the collection of a comprehensive search on data in the state, all related to alternative fuel vehicles and fuels in the state. We use that data to really inform every phase of every step, or should I say, of the process as we put together this report. The report consists of a summary of the transportation sector in Connecticut, including descriptions of the important energy and climate goals the state has, as well as the state of play for existing conventional alternative fuel vehicles in the state. Terry also mentioned we had 4 criteria that we use to weigh the different fuels and vehicles against each other. They're listed here. They include near-term market feasibility, frankly, what's practical in the next 5 years in the state, the environmental performance and how different vehicles and fuels can help meet the state's energy and climate goals, the cost effectiveness of these different vehicles and fuels, how do they compare with gasoline and other diesel conventional vehicles, And finally, another important goal of the state is to advance its economy, and so we looked at the potential local economic impact of the greater use of different alternate fuels. And so throughout the study, it focuses not just on passenger vehicles, but also on medium and heavy-duty trucks. But I want to jump to the conclusion because it's really informative for what we'll be focusing on primarily today. In a nutshell, through the work of Atlas and the Green Bank, DEEP, and others, we concluded that electric vehicles, plug-in electric vehicles, are the best option to promote for the state to meet its goals. And this is for a variety of reasons. First, the automakers are investing billions of dollars into this technology. They already have, and they are continuing to do so in the near term, and will be introducing a variety of different kinds of electric vehicles within the next few years. In addition, the current public policy framework in the state of Connecticut supports electric vehicle adoption. In particular, the state has a vehicle rebate called Cheaper that's administered by DEEP in order to encourage the adoption of electric vehicles. And in addition, through the analysis, we show that, in fact, EVs can achieve a net cost savings over gasoline vehicles, meaning given the current incentives, they can actually be cheaper to own and operate than a conventional vehicle. And they also have the opportunity of providing a local economic boost. In summary, the stable fuel prices of electricity, which is denoted by the chart on the right, advances in technology, in particular through the heavy investment of the auto industry, as well as charging service providers in the electric utility industry, as well as the opportunity to reduce emissions with electric vehicles cost effectively, is a compelling approach to decarbonize the transportation sector. Just one more comment about the chart on the right. What you can see is this is on an energy equivalent basis, the cost per gallon of fuel. And you can see the bottom line that's very stable, and it has been, frankly, for about 40 years when you account for inflation. That's the price of electricity here in New England. The price that looks like it's fluctuating a lot is the price of diesel and gasoline vehicles, diesel and gasoline fuel. And so, yes, we're experiencing a period of low gas prices in New England and around the world, but there's no doubt that those prices will eventually creep back up. But what we can say with some certainty is that electricity prices will remain relatively stable for the foreseeable future. I mentioned data early on, and that Atlas really likes to use data to inform its analyses and decision-making processes. And so what we did when we first started to work with the Green Bank is assemble what we call a relational database for the state. And in a nutshell, what a relational database is number of different data sets combined through specific relationships. Those relationships can be date and time. They can also be location, or some other kind of category. And I'll get into some examples of how we can use that this database in just a bit. But what you can see in the slide is with it, we can create really kind of compelling visualizations. The maps on the right show you, just for example, where the population centers are in the state on the top, as well as where charging stations are located throughout the state. And on the map on the bottom, you can see the average median household income by county is the shaded regions, and the three-dimensional bars are the number of rebates that were instituted for electric vehicles as part of the Cheaper program. And so it's creating these kind of visualizations throughout this study really helps inform where we think most of the opportunities will lie. And throughout the second phase of the project, we'll be starting to make this data more publicly accessible as part of phase 2. So I mentioned early on that we concluded in the study that electric vehicles are the most promising way for the state to achieve its energy and climate goals. And so throughout the rest of the slide deck, you're going to see a few terms, and so I just want to make sure we're all on the same page with what these acronyms mean. I tried to restrict or limit the amount of acronyms I have in here, so I apologize, but this is one slide we need for now. So plug-in electric vehicle, that could, or an EV, could be a battery electric vehicle or a BEV, which is a vehicle that's only powered by batteries There's also a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, a PHEV, or an extended range electric vehicle, EREV, EREV. And these are vehicles that can be powered by either batteries, a gasoline engine, or both. So that's the vehicle acronym summary. We also have charging levels. We have level 1, which is effectively the same as charging out of a standard power outlet in your home. We have level 2, which is like plugging into the dryer socket that you use for your clothes dryer. And obviously that's able to charge a vehicle battery quite a bit more quickly than level 1. And at the highest level, we have DC quick charge or DC fast charging stations. And that can recharge a battery quite quickly. It's currently only available to charge battery electric vehicles, or BEVs. These charging stations are important for BEVs to enable long-distance travel. They can be quite costly, upwards of $100,000 per station to install, to get power to that station, and also to purchase and operate the equipment. But it's a critical part of building out a comprehensive electric vehicle network. So what is the state of play? What's going on in Connecticut when it comes to transportation? Well, first and foremost, the transportation sector is by far the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state, 40%. And while current federal and state programs are helping either reduce emissions, they're not doing so quite fast enough. The state has very ambitious climate goals in place, and with current policy, we could expect the state to have about 3 times the amount of transportation emissions in 2050 than its long-term climate goal. So basically, current policy is not going to be enough. We have to do more if the state's going to be able to meet its goals. And then we dive just a little bit deeper and say, well, where are these emissions coming from? It's clear that light-duty passenger vehicles are what dominate the Connecticut market. They consist of about 95% of the vehicle stock, and almost 3/4 of the vehicle energy use in the state is from the light-duty stock. So clearly, we got to focus on passenger cars. In addition, there are about 10 different alternative fuel options for vehicles in the state of various degrees of attractiveness, and which I'll get into in just a moment. But in particular, based on the evidence we have, plug-in electric vehicle is the most widely available alternative fuel vehicle at this time. So I mentioned the 4 criteria that we had laid out to weigh these different fuels and vehicles against each other. So now I'm just going to try to march through them. So in summary, we looked at passenger vehicles and medium and heavy-duty vehicles for each different of 10 alternative fuels. And I'm going to highlight the winners, if you will. So for passenger vehicles, the near-term feasibility, electricity is the clear winner. Connecticut, along with 9 other states, are a part of a program called the Zero Emission Vehicle Program. This is out of the state of California. That is kind of a foundational policy for these states in their EV policy frameworks. The program's objective is to increase the availability of electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles throughout these jurisdictions over the next 10 years and significantly increase adoption. But they can't do it on their own. The program can't do it on its own. So the state also has other policies in place, including a state-based rebate, which I mentioned earlier, cheaper, but we also have federal tax incentives for plug-in electric vehicles, which is quite sizable, up to $7,500. And finally, we have relative to other alternative fuels, there's a lot of available charging infrastructure. I'll make some more comments about that in a moment. But relative to other fuels, there's quite a bit of available infrastructure already. I won't go into too much detail about the truck side. As I mentioned, that's not really a focus for the second phase of our work with the Green Bank. But I encourage you to take a look in depth at the report if you're interested in learning more about those findings. So let's take a look at the EV market in Connecticut. What you can see on the right is a series of visualizations that help us get some insights into what's going on. And what we can say at the highest level is the sales of these cars, these electric vehicles, are resilient even in a period of low gas prices. In addition, the concentration of vehicles is in the southwest portion of the state, but there is deployment throughout. And finally, DC fast charging infrastructure, an important component of a vibrant battery electric vehicle market, is not quite widespread yet. So if we zoom in on one of those charts, the sales chart, what you can see is this is plug-in electric vehicles and battery electric vehicle sales on a quarterly basis over time from the beginning of the electric vehicle market right up until the second quarter of 2016, overlaid with the retail gasoline prices. And so right around the time when gasoline prices fell in the summer of 2014, you don't necessarily see an immediate response in the data, at least in the state of Connecticut. Instead, what you see is right around the second quarter of 2015, you see a kind of a steady increase in sales of battery electric vehicles in particular, but also of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And that happens to correspond with the beginning of the cheaper vehicle rebate program. So that gives us some evidence that that program is helping drive some interest in the market. One other thing I'd say about the market overall, nationally, we are having a record year for sales for electric vehicles at the moment. At least we're on target for that, to set a record. And so the national picture actually looks quite positive at this point. So if we look a little bit at the data on the cheaper program, that rebate program, it started in May of 2015. It's provided about $2 million so far towards purchases, and that's led to 568 plug-in hybrids and 284 battery electrics, or at least that's what it's funded. It's quite possible that somebody has purchased a vehicle without taking advantage of the rebate as well. In addition, what you can see in the chart on the bottom right is the vast variety of plug-in electric vehicles that the rebate has helped deploy, 15 in total. Most of these vehicles are small and mid-sized cars at this point, but based on the evidence from the auto industry, there'll be larger vehicles will be made more readily available in the market soon. One comment about infrastructure. So what we can see in this is there is quite a bit of public infrastructure kind of sprinkled throughout the state. The black dots are level 2, the kind of lower power charging, and DC fast charging are the greenish blue dots. And what we can see is while there are 42 DC fast charging locations in the state, if you do have a battery electric vehicle and you're trying to make a trip, basically, many areas are kind of inaccessible at this point for these drivers if they're only relying on quick charging. This chart just kind of summarizes what we're looking at when we think about the near-term feasibility and availability of vehicles and fuels. If we look specifically at the passenger vehicle segment, what we can see is there aren't that many options for alternative fuels. And electricity just clearly seems to be the winner, especially when it comes to passenger cars. So let's look at another criterion, environmental performance. In this case, for the passenger space, we've got two clear winners. One is electricity and the other is hydrogen. These are the only two fuels that really have the opportunity to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so long as the feedstocks for these fuels are low carbon. Here's a chart, the results of part of the analysis that we showed, that we completed for this study. What we can see is this is greenhouse gas emissions on a per mile basis. The top fuel is a plug-in hybrid kind of vehicle. The second is an electric car. The third is the hydrogen fuel cell. The fourth is a flex fuel E85 vehicle only powered by biofuels, and finally a gasoline vehicle. And then we did two scenarios. One was kind of a good low-case scenario, and the other was the default for the analytical tool used from Argonne National Laboratory called GREET. And so what you can see from this chart is just by default, the high case, if you will, looks pretty darn good for electric vehicles compared to a gasoline vehicle. And that's because Connecticut has a very attractive and increasingly decarbonizing electrical grid. hydrogen fuel cells are not so great by default if that fuel comes from natural gas. But if it is able to come through electrolysis from renewable energy, hydrogen starts to look quite attractive, as you can see in the low case. And if renewable energy, solar power, or zero carbon power like nuclear power, or wind energy is recharging those batteries in an electric car, you can see we can get significantly reduced emissions. And one thing you might wonder is, well, why is there emissions in an electric car if the power is renewable? And that's because this is a life cycle assessment. We're looking not just at the vehicle from the fuel. We're also looking at the full life cycle assessment of the vehicle. So from the well to the wheels, including the vehicle itself. So the third criterion is cost effectiveness. And once again, the results seemed pretty clear that electric vehicles showed the most promise. They had the lowest abatement costs, so the dollars per ton of greenhouse gas emissions abated for sure for all vehicles if there are vehicle incentives in place. In addition to incentives, Connecticut has incentives for solar as part of the Green Bank. And in those cases, you've got significant opportunity to save money for consumers, but also to reduce emissions. Let me show a little bit more detail on that. So what you're looking at is the lifetime cost of a passenger vehicle under various passenger vehicles. You can see we did a lot of different scenarios. And tried to use really comparable vehicles. So we started with the Chevy Cruze, that's a gasoline-powered vehicle, quite affordable car, pretty efficient. And we compared that to a number of different alternative vehicles, including electric cars, a biofueled E85 car, and the hydrogen fuel cell car offered by Toyota. And we also looked at it, with incentives and without incentives. And when you have incentives, in particular with the residential solar incentives, what you can see, that yellow line, the Nissan Leaf, a battery electric vehicle, is by far the least cost over lifetime for a consumer. So not only are you reducing emissions, but you're also actually saving money. And even if you take away the solar incentives and you pay just using electricity off the grid, with incentives, again, the electric vehicle is the lowest cost over lifetime. And this is using very reasonable assumptions, $2.50 gas, which is about the price, right around the price that consumers are paying today. So this is not the gas prices of some years ago. What you can also see from the chart, of course, is that there aren't really many other alternatives that look practical. One thing I'd highlight in addition is the Chevy Volt. If we are able to get, if you do have incentives in place, the cost of owning that Chevy Volt, which is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle that travels quite a bit, potentially travels on gasoline as well, that can be cost comparable to a Chevy Cruze. So now let's take a different cut at looking at that same analysis. On the left side, you can see the total lifetime costs in just dollars, and on the right side, you can see the abatement costs. So if you're looking to help reduce the effects of climate change, especially from the transportation sector, the cost of reducing a ton of emissions is an important metric. We call that the abatement cost, and that's the chart on the right. So the red is on the chart on the left. Looking back on the left, you can see the Chevy Cruze. It costs $62,000 or so to own it outright, including all the fuel, maintenance, etc. costs, lifetime costs. The yellow bars are the scenarios where the abatement costs, the chart on the right, are actually lower than the social cost of carbon. The social cost of carbon is the federal government's estimate for the cost to society of greenhouse gas emissions. So anything lower than that social cost of carbon is actually a good deal, effectively. And that's the yellow ones. And the green bars are scenarios where the cost is actually lower than the gasoline vehicle. So you end up having a little funny look on the chart, but it's a negative abatement cost, because that's because it's actually saving consumers money. finally, let's take a look at the economic impacts, the local economic impacts. And this is a really difficult thing to estimate, so we just try to highlight based on the observations that we have certainty over. So once again, electricity looked like the most promising fuel for the state. And that's because they have a sizable power generation capacity. And so the fact that a lot of the power that Connecticut residents and businesses consume is generated in the state, spending more dollars on electricity actually keeps those dollars inside the state as opposed to exporting it for conventional gasoline. In addition, federal funds support plug-in electric vehicles. That vehicle tax credit I mentioned earlier from the federal government, that's money coming into the state. And so that's a benefit as well. And third, electric vehicles, as I mentioned just a moment ago, can actually achieve a net cost savings over gasoline vehicles. And those extra dollars in consumers' pockets could be spent on other activities within the state to boost its economy. And putting those three factors together, it's clear that electric passenger cars are probably the most promising way of boosting the state's economy when it comes to alternative fuels. And our estimate is that it would have a positive impact on the state's economy. What you can see from this chart summarizing the results of the study, that electric vehicles in only certain, including a medium-duty delivery truck, actually have a positive effect from our assessment on the state's economy, while most have a neutral or negative effect with current technology and current fuel prices. So I've already shown you this slide, but I just want to reiterate the point of this study and what we were able to conclude, and that is that electric vehicles are the best option for the state to meet its climate, energy, and economic goals. And that's for a number of reasons. The automakers have invested billions into this technology already, and they've made announcements to double down on that in the near future. So we can expect more electric vehicles of different types, including light-duty SUVs and other kinds of plug-in hybrid technologies to electrify more drivetrains of vehicles in the near future. We can also expect the range of electric vehicles to increase significantly. In just 5 years, the range of an electric vehicle that costs around $30,000 has jumped from somewhere in the order of 75 miles to the Chevy Bolt, which will get over 230 miles on a single charge for about $30,000 after the federal tax incentive, and even lower in the state of Connecticut after you include its vehicle rebate. So huge progress in a short period, much quicker, I'd say, than many analysts expected when EVs were first introduced in the market in 2010. Current policy framework in Connecticut also does support electric vehicles, and so there's already a lot already in place in order to help make these vehicles look attractive to consumers. And finally, they have the potential to achieve a net cost savings, in particular if we're able to link it with solar energy. So what are the next steps? Well, the Green Bank, which is a fantastic institution that looks to leverage small amounts of public investment in track private dollars into clean energy projects. So we want to try to look at ways of mirroring the success of its other programs, such as the CPACE program or its residential solar program. And to do that, we identified 4 promising concepts. The first is the pairing of electric vehicles and residential solar photovoltaic systems, solar PV. If you recall back in the economic assessment piece of the study, the lowest cost option for consumers is pairing of residential solar PV and an electric vehicle. So we're looking into ways of trying to support that. In addition, we're looking into ways of supporting electric shared use mobility solutions. So think the Ubers of the world, the Lyfts of the world, or Zipcards. These programs could potentially be more valuable to society and to Connecticut if we can try to deploy them in a way that supports electric vehicles. And in particular, the state has an interest in looking at the opportunities around using these programs to support low and moderate income families. Third is, as longer range electric vehicles hit the road, like a Chevy Bolt or the Tesla Model 3, we need more public charging in place in order to support those vehicles and make them a practical alternative to a gasoline vehicle as opposed to just a secondary car. And so the state is interested, Green Bank is interested in looking at ways to support advanced or higher power publicly available charging infrastructure. And finally, there's an interest in looking at the electrification of the transit fleet, in particular electric buses. Electric buses are really kind of taking off relative to how they've been in recent years. There's a lot of support at the federal level for deploying electric buses right now, and there could be an opportunity there with the Green Bank. So what we're working on in phase 2 is building what we call the Transportation Electrification Toolkit. The toolkit is going to consist of a summary of the concepts, including the concepts that I laid out just a moment ago. Those 4 concepts, maybe, excuse me, those 4 concepts, along with what is the role of the Green Bank in the private sector, and what is the key enabling technologies in the business models. We'll also conclude a case study or 2 on the concepts from outside Connecticut to give a sense of what's working, what might be possible here in Connecticut. And then finally, we'd like to look at the idea of having spotlights within Connecticut communities to highlight opportunities for transportation electrification throughout the state. And that concludes my presentation. I know we've got quite a bit of time for questions, so I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Nick. That was really a great overview of the report and the findings. So we have a few questions to start with, but folks who are listening in, if you have additional questions, please go ahead and send them in using the dialog box, and I'll read them aloud. So I'll go ahead and start with the first question. So Nick, can you talk a little bit about the travel provision and its near-term expiration and how you maybe have some insight on what to expect the EV market to change or look like in the Northeast?
Wow, that's a really thoughtful question. We've got a really educated audience here, I can tell.
That might have come from me.
Oh, okay. Nice. So maybe first things first, I should explain what the travel provision is for the audience, and then we can talk a little bit about what its implications are. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yep.
So the travel provision is a component of the Zero Emission Vehicle Program. I mentioned that some slides ago as one of the key ingredients to a the successful policy framework here in the state of Connecticut. So what the travel provision says in a nutshell, and Carrie, please correct me if I'm off a little bit, is that this is a California program. The ZEV program is created by the state of California and under unique authority under the Clean Air Act. It's basically a carve-out because of California's unique situation when it comes to local air emissions. And so they can develop these programs like the ZEV program, and states are free to follow those programs directly. They can't really change them per se and do their own regulatory structure on emissions like that from mobile sources, but they can follow it. And so what the travel provision allows for is for automakers to effectively comply with the ZEV program up until 2018 by only really getting credits, the ZEV credits necessary for program compliance within the state of California. So basically, you comply with the program by getting the credits for California, and those can be traveled, or I don't know what the right verb is there, to the other states. But beginning in 2018 is when the automakers will have to begin to get credits from those other states as well. Would you say that's a good description of?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. And so the debate now is, well, what's going to happen? So for a long period, if you look at the sales of electric vehicles, and I can pull some of that stuff up if people are interested. The lion's share of vehicles are being sold in California, and the lion's share of vehicles are being made available in California. And so, in 2018, are all the automakers just going to start introducing these cars all over the place in the ZEV states? That's the question. And will the states be ready? Do they have the infrastructure in place to support mass adoption of these vehicles? Because the program actually calls for a pretty steep increase in vehicle credits, or vehicle sales effectively, beginning in 2018 to 2025. In the current debate, the program is actually being debated currently in California as part of a midterm review. And the current debate is over, these credits that automakers get for selling vehicles. It turns out they're getting a lot more credits than I think the program designers thought when the program was first being implemented. And so that's potentially having an effect on what the travel provision will the results of the travel provision come 2018. In a nutshell, the credits that the automakers have accumulated in a few years, they can be banked and used to comply with the program after 2018. And so the kind of cliff, if you will, of the travel provision might not be so abrupt, and it might actually be dragged out a few years and further than what people thought because of the effects of the credits, which the reason there are so many more credits is there were more longer range electric vehicles sold than I think than the program designers originally thought would happen.
Great. Anything else to add to that?
No, happy to add more though. Is there anything else you'd like me to clarify on it?
No, I think a follow-up question that would be, do you think that the New England, you might not have the answer to this, but do you think the New England region is adequately prepared for greater deployment of EVs?
No. No, I don't think any real, if you look at the adoption rates of vehicles and infrastructure as a metric, very, very few regions in the country, not just New England, are actually prepared for mass adoption of electric vehicles. One of the real great benefits of electric cars is the ability to charge at home, and that's a fantastic benefit. And it serves plug-in hybrids well, and it serves locally traveled all-electric vehicles well. But as soon as you start to get out into the public, in particular with longer-range electric vehicles, you actually become more dependent on public charging in order to make these cars a viable alternative to a gasoline vehicle. And that lack of public charging is evident not just in New England, but it's really evident, in most of the country. And so that's a real challenge in the near term. And there's a healthy debate over the need to build out that infrastructure in order to achieve climate goals. But I do believe that you'll need significant more infrastructure in the near term to support the longer range all-electric vehicles.
Great. A few more questions here. Is there any evidence that increased availability of EVs and stable electricity prices are helping to dampen volatility and hold down the price of oil and gasoline?
I think there's actually some really great research done by Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and I can send that link out to folks if they're interested on the potential effects of greater EV adoption in the near term. We're talking, within the next 6 or so years, on potentially having that effect on the oil market. I think we're too small though at this point. We've got 500,000 vehicles on the road. They are traveling a number of electric miles a year for sure, but the reality is I don't think that the market is quite big enough to have a sizable effect at this point.
Great. Okay, a question on deploying the infrastructure. Should we wait for the technology to advance or continue to expand infrastructure with the current technology? So the difference in the rate of charging, the pace of.
Yeah. This is a really challenging question. There's a couple of different dimensions to it. There's the mentality of, do you build the infrastructure at all if the cars aren't there? Or do you have a build it and they will come kind of mentality? Different states have taken different tacks with that. For example, Oregon and Vermont built out a lot of DC fast charging infrastructure early on in the market. And what you can see from the high level results of that, there's significant higher penetration rates of battery electric vehicles per person, per capita, in Oregon than in most other states. And they don't have a vehicle incentive. But while in Vermont, there really isn't. And that's perhaps because the vehicle availability question that's being debated right now. The car is actually going to be put on the, are they being put on the lot for people to buy? That's one possible factor. Another factor is the climate and the land use in Vermont. It's not really necessarily conducive to these shorter range all electric vehicles. So those are kind of part of the ingredients you have to consider when you're thinking about infrastructure build out. On the specific question of technology, for sure technology is advancing rapidly. The Department of Energy is currently looking at the potential of 350 kilowatt charging. If you go back to the few of the slides earlier, DC fast charging currently only goes up to 90 kilowatts, and that is huge when you consider that the peak power of an average family home in the United States, the peak power is only about 7 kilowatts. So 90 kilowatts is obviously a lot over 10 homes, but 350 kilowatts, that's starting to get really somewhere. And so my recommendation in the near term is to basically try wherever feasible, include additional power capacity to be able to accommodate that higher power charging in the future. You need infrastructure now, for sure. The equipment, it turns out, is not the lion's share of the cost of installation. It's getting the power to the equipment. And if you do that part right, you could maybe pay a little bit more up front, but reap those benefits in the long term as higher power charging becomes more available. And I should say, not just higher power charging, redundant charging. So as soon as you add one charging station, you might find that it's used all the time and you need to add another one. And so, or maybe perhaps it's down occasionally. That redundant charging is also an important consideration when you're thinking about infrastructure.
Okay, let's see. So on slide 20, you mentioned that hydrogen has a negative effect on the economy. Can you talk a little bit more about why that is? Connecticut is the fuel cell state, so understanding that a little bit more would be helpful.
Sure. That's primarily because the cost of the vehicle and the fuel is more expensive. I'm showing that slide right now. I'm going to go back a little bit to the slide on the total cost of ownership. That's really the source of this. The cost of a fuel cell vehicle is currently very expensive, and it's in part because this is the first generation of it. It's expensive technology, and for sure they'll be able to drive costs down somewhat in the near future. The other cost driver, though, is the fuel. And you can tell that by looking at the kind of slope of these lines over time. The slope is pretty steep for hydrogen, and that's because the cost of that fuel is quite expensive. And even the modeling, the availability of hydrogen is pretty low in general in the United States at this point. And the availability of modeling to be able to cost out these is also pretty low. So Atlas actually built its own little quick discounted cash flow assessment for hydrogen. We had it reviewed by Toyota to make sure we weren't unreasonable in the assumptions. And so this is the reality right now for hydrogen. I don't think this is the long term for that fuel, and I think it plays a strong role in particular for heavier vehicles. Because fuel cells have that capacity to drive heavier vehicles more easily than a battery might. But in the near term, it's not a great story, I don't think.
Okay. What are the types of things a municipality or a regional planning group can do to help lay the foundation for increased penetration of EVs or to help spur the EV market?
That is a great question. And I'm actually, if you don't mind, I'm just going to pull up another slide that I've been working on that tries to get to the heart of that. Just give me 1 second. Because the answer is, there's a lot you can do, and it really depends on what resources you have available in order to get something done. So let me just I'm just going to try to pull up that slide. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So there are lots of drivers. The International Council on Clean Transportation, ICCT, put out a really great report that tries to begin to talk about what those drivers are at the metropolitan level. And this is a summary slide that I made of that study, and you can see there's lots, from incentives to the building out of infrastructure to the attempts to increase the availability of models, vehicle models, and really trying to build an ecosystem. One of the challenges of electric vehicles is that you're talking about the merging of two of the largest sectors of the economy, transportation and electricity. And so you have a lot of different stakeholders that need to get engaged for that to work. And in cities that have tried to build that ecosystem, I think have been more successful with EV adoption. And this is just another slide on that. There are some great studies, one out of the state of California and one in Vermont, on what are some of the policies and programs that a city can implement in order to encourage EV adoption. You can see that the thing on the right there, this toolbox. This comes from a report that I helped lead back when I was at a nonprofit in DC for the Department of Energy, that really captured all the lessons learned from readiness activities, readiness grants that were implemented by communities across the country a few years ago. So there's lots of things, from getting your zoning figured out, making sure that the signage is consistent, updating your building codes, for example, in order to make sure that as new homes are being built, you spend that extra $100 or so to make sure that you have charging access in a garage. That's a small investment up front that pays dividends over time by preventing people from having to dig into a garage or upgrade a power panel or such. Streamlining the permitting and inspection processes for charging infrastructure installation. And depending on your community, you might need to develop a strategy for multi-unit dwellings. If you're living in an urban community where a lot of people park on the street or park in multifamily dwellings, there's a lot of unique challenges to that also could be addressed.
Great, thank you. So on one of the slides, you had a picture of the adoption or utilizing the rebates in Connecticut, and it was concentrated in a wealthier part of the state of Connecticut. Have other states taken a different approach to structuring their rebates to address inequity or equity issues?
Yeah, so what I would say about that is, it's true that the rebates are concentrated in the southwest portion of the state where the income is higher on average, for sure. But what we do see in the data is that these vehicles are making their way into all communities. And so in the short term, I wouldn't suggest really going too far with trying to structure incentive programs to try to carve out the market and carve it up because it's quite small. And having said that, other states have done such a thing. They've added income caps, household income caps, to be able to take advantage of incentive. They've also instituted MSRP caps. And I think those are well-intentioned policies, but what they do in the near term is add complexity to implementing a program. And one thing that the electric vehicle market doesn't need any more of is complexity. It is already complicated enough in order to educate consumers about the potential value of an electric vehicle, and adding MSRP caps and making people somehow submit their tax returns in order to get a vehicle incentive can really deter adoption. Happy to talk more about that too.
Okay, I don't see any more questions that have come in, so I want to go ahead and thank you so much for, again, presenting today. It was really great, and thank you for taking all those questions, which weren't necessarily directly related to the report, but were really, really great information. Any concluding thoughts or final things you want to say?
Well, I'd say I'm very excited to see what the state's able to do, with you folks at DEEP and in the Green Bank. I think that there's a big opportunity to stand out in the near term when it comes to electric vehicles. There's a lot of opportunity for innovation, and the fact that you have interest from so many different state agencies, not just DEEP and the quasi-agency as the Green Bank, but the DOT and others. I think that there's going to be a real opportunity in the near term for Connecticut to kind of distinguish itself as a leader in this space. So I'm excited to help try to make that happen.
Great, excellent. So folks on the line, if continue to tune in to this series. If you have ideas or suggestions on topics that you'd like to hear more about, feel free to send them to our climate change email address. We definitely would like to hear from you. We haven't announced our next webinar, but it should be sometime in November, and we'll send out an email to let you know what that topic is. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.